Hello, Enrique. My name is Javier Rodriguez. I'm from Ingema company, and I'm member of a European Decontamination Institute. And thank you very much for coming with us.
Hi, Javier, good morning. And thank you so much to you for having me here at the European Decontamination Institute. Indeed, my name is Enrique Garcia. I work in the Directorate General for the Environment of the European Commission, and more specifically in the unit dealing with waste and secondary materials, which actually now it's changed its name and it's called From Waste to Resources. So that's already a declaration of intentions.
Thank you. Perfect, because today we want to talk about POPs.
Indeed, yes, and indeed, I think POPs is very relevant, especially right now. So persistent organic pollutants are a bit in the spotlight in recent times, amongst other things, because we are now amending the waste annexes of the POPs regulation. I will maybe talk a bit more about it later. But yes, overall they are a very relevant element in environmental management and in terms of human health. Obviously, I think they are part of our previous industrial history, where these substances have been used in the past for different uses. As you know, under the Stockholm Convention, these substances are all targeted for elimination. Most of them are not used anymore, or only used for very limited purposes and for a defined time period. But of course, we have to deal with them when they become waste in products, when in the past they were allowed.
Yes, we know that we have a lot of problems with POPs in groundwater and soils. And well, the coming or the way for European Union for these POPs is new.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we have had a regulation dealing with POPs already since the year 2004. The European Union is a party to the Stockholm Convention, also to the Basel Convention as regards hazardous wastes and other waste, and that sets a bit the international context. And of course, in Europe, we have the POPs regulation, which was recast in the year 2019. So we have been working and dealing with ways to phase out these persistent organic pollutants and to deal with emissions of these pollutants originating from waste and minimizing those emissions already for a long time. But of course, first of all, new POPs are being identified under the Stockholm Convention almost every 2 years, every time there's a conference of the parties. And we have to do the necessary to introduce them into the European legislation, and then of course that triggers the actions that happen, in particular in the POPs regulation under Article 7, which really sets the framework together with the annexes of that regulation about how POPs in waste have to be dealt with. And that is something that we are now working in amending those annexes, and it is a very important element in managing these substances and in the broader setting of things. Of course, it links very much to our ambitions linked to the Zero Pollution Action Plan and in general to our Zero Pollution ambition. But it has also all the other angles because we have many different targets under the Green Deal, which includes, for instance, and very particularly the carbon neutrality ambition towards the year 2050. So that everything that we do and all our policies that is inbuilt, so that our actions will not be making this problem bigger, and they should contribute to decarbonization rather than going in the opposite direction. And then, of course, we have the Circular Economy Action Plan, where we also want to make the most of the value of the materials in waste and bring them back into the economy. And here we have this very delicate balance between making the most of the materials that we can recycle, but at the same time ensuring that these materials that we bring back and pump back into the economy are safe and have the lowest possible content in substances which are problematic, and this is very particularly true in the case of persistent organic pollutants.
You and me know about POP, but could you explain to the other people that they don't know about POP what is?
Yes, yeah, indeed, Javier. Sometimes we forget that some of this language and some of these concepts are not so extended, and I think we all need to do an effort in communicating more about what this means and how we deal with, in the end, with problematic substances which are in products and ultimately can have an impact on the environment and on human health. Persistent organic pollutants is a name given to a whole set of substances which, first of all, are organic, as its name indicates. They have harmful effects on human health due to different toxicological properties, and they remain in the environment for a very long time. They also get easily transported across borders, and that basically means that because they last so long, they have toxic properties. And they really do not degrade in the environment, or they only do it very slowly. It means that they will stay with us for a very long time, sometimes almost forever, and they move easily all across the globe. So the issue with POPs is that they have become a global problem. They have an impact on human health. They have different types of toxic properties. Some of these are effects that happen in the long term, so associated to cancer, associated to effects on human reproduction, or associated on effects, for example, on the hormone system. So there are many different POPs and different sets of effects, but in most cases they are long-term effects, serious effects, and we just have a great difficulty in dealing with these substances once they have been emitted, because they will be there for a very long time. They accumulate, they move across food chains, they are spread over the globe. Yeah. So they are an insidious and difficult problem to deal with, and that's why it is taken so seriously that there is an international convention to deal with them, which is the Stockholm Convention, of which the EU and member states are signatory, which takes upon itself the task of saying what substances are POPs and which are not, because once they are identified as POPs, then the different parties, including the European Union, have to take measures on them. And such identifications happen based on scientific criteria, and they are ratified normally every 2 years at the level of the Conference of the Parties. And for example, just to give a few examples, what are we talking about? What are these persistent organic compounds? Of course, most of them are substances with exotic and complex chemical names. Some of them are on the media. For example, you will have heard about some perfluorinated substances such as PFOS, PFOA, which was listed recently. I will spare you the detailed chemical names. There are also quite a number of substances used as flame retardants. So to make plastics or textiles or other materials burn less, or burn less easily, at least. So they are a matter of fire safety as well. And there you will find some substances, for example, HBCD, also known as HBCDD, hexabromocyclododecane, which is added to the insulation material which is put in buildings. You can talk about different types of polybrominated diphenyl ethers, known as PBDEs, which are a family of compounds very much used as additives to plastic, used in electronics, used in the automotive sector. But there are another big family of POPs are, for example, some pesticides. So things used to treat pests in crops. Some are biocides as well. An example which is in this sector of construction is, for example, pentachlorophenol, PCP, which has been used in the past to treat wood, to prevent it from rotting. So, of course, all of these things are not used anymore, at least in Europe, in some cases with very small exceptions, but we still have to deal with them when the materials they were put in become waste. And of course, in the case of materials which are put into buildings, and buildings have a long lifespan, 50, 70, 80 years easily. So things that were not even regulated when some materials were put in buildings, now they will be demolished between now and the next 50 years. All of these things which we thought were in the past, because we are regulating them upstream, we will still have to deal with them for decades to come. And that is a very important element, because of course we have to see how we fit this in our ambitions for a clean circular economy, where we want to get rid of these substances to the greatest extent possible, but we also want to make the most of the materials which we can recover from buildings, from electrical and electronic equipment, from end-of-life vehicles, and from so many other important waste streams.
And in this building, when the building is demolished, This kind of POPs, what type of elements have POPs in the building when demolate?
Okay, yes, of course. Throughout history, many substances which today are known as or have been identified as POPs were in commonplace use in building materials. And of course, as you know, demolition waste is one of the biggest waste streams in the Union today. Approximately a third of all the waste generated in the Union is actually demolition waste. So it is not a minor thing to deal with. So typical POPs or typical materials arising from demolition where you can find POPs are, for instance, as I was mentioning at another point, pentachlorophenol used to treat wood, especially wood or textiles, also things like covers, tarpaulins, things like this, mostly for external use because, of course, these substances which are used to prevent the wood from rotting, they are more relevant in outdoor uses than inside, but you have both. So PCP is one of the typical wood contaminants, and in many countries the wood is segregated and sent for incineration to destroy these POPs. But there are other uses. Perhaps the most well-known POP in demolition material is actually hexabromocyclododecane, HBCDD, because that is a flame retardant which has been introduced for decades, more or less from the 70s, into expanded and extruded polystyrene, which in construction, as you know very well, is used as an insulation material. It's the white stuff that goes in between the walls or in roofing, etc. And of course, there have been hundreds of thousands of tons of this material. It is coming out now in demolition, and it is expected that much more will come out in demolition up until probably the 2060s or 2070s. So this is an increasing waste stream that we have to deal with. And yeah, it is not a desirable thing that this ends up in landfills, for example.
Okay, and then you think that we need to make a POP survey in building, like a asbestos survey first and demolition?
Yes, I would say that, of course, I would agree, and that is, I mean, the need to promote selective demolition is clear in the European waste legislation, and that has been strengthened in the review that was done of the Waste Framework Directive in the year 2018, which of course requires and promotes selective demolition and the segregation of materials with a number of purposes. Of course, the first one is to separate hazardous waste and hazardous materials, which constitute that hazardous waste, from non-hazardous material. The intention of that is to be able to specifically treat in a suitable and environmentally sound manner the hazardous fractions, and on the other hand, and keep them separated. That's also clear, the obligation to keep separate and not mix hazardous waste with non-hazardous waste, so that we can then follow the main lines in the current Waste Framework Directive, which places an enormous amount of emphasis on, first of all, waste prevention, of course, the waste hierarchy, but then also preparation for reuse, recycling, and if there is no other way, of course, also energy recovery and ultimately final disposal. So in order to do this in the best way possible, we need to separate the hazardous from the non-hazardous material and keep separate, distinct material streams, which will enable the proper processing and ultimately obtaining high-quality, clean material that can be put back into the economy. And that, of course, is also very relevant in terms of the POPs.
We want to thank about your work in Community European about the pre-demolition guide you make about this guide is perfect for survey all of contaminants and only look for asbestos, but I think is all other these other types of contaminants is very important for us.
Yeah, no, Javier, what you're telling me is socially makes me very happy to hear that. And of course, in the Commission, we are well aware of the relevance of communicating and providing guidelines for practitioners in doing selective demolition, so that it will be possible to identify and to then take the necessary methodological approaches to separate the hazardous from the non-hazardous materials during demolition, because that is the only way of ensuring clean non-hazardous streams that can be further processed, and at the same time ensure the proper treatment of the contaminated fractions, be it with POPs or be it with other hazardous substances such as, for example, asbestos or lead or many other heavy metals, for example, that are relevant. So yeah, I am certainly happy that these guidelines are taken into account and that the sector is aware of them. And yeah, even I believe that there are also some national implementations of these guidelines at the national level. So that is indeed very good.
Very important guide for our work. But do you think all of countries knows the very important about POP, or people know about this problem?
Well, I mean, of course. Whenever we're talking about chemicals policy and dealing with identifying and addressing the presence of chemicals in different products, maybe when we're talking about consumer products, society has a greater interest and a clearer view of certain contaminants, be it in toys or be it in food contact materials. There is a greater public attention. Of course, when we are talking about a sector which is perhaps a more professional area like demolition, this doesn't get so easily, neither to society in general, although of course we all live in a house or in a building or work in an office, but it is perhaps well known beyond some aspects on indoor air quality. And even amongst practitioners and professionals which are planning a demolition, or then the waste operators, it is a more exotic and a more complex area to address when we start talking about these substances with complex names which are perhaps not commonplace. So really, we do believe there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of communication, in terms of guidance. We have, of course, already done efforts in providing the guidance that you were mentioning before. And of course, the Commission is doing different communication work, and it will continue to do this. Also, in all our communication, in all our recent communications, and we have had a lot recently on all areas in the circular economy action plan, on the zero pollution action plan, on things like farm to fork, and in general, probably all of this is put together by the chemical strategy on sustainability, which are all important elements under the Green Deal. We are trying to address in a holistic way the problem of hazardous substances and how they affect human health and the environment, and to get this into all policy in a horizontal manner. And of course, dealing with these substances in construction and demolition is very important, precisely because of the very large amount of material we're getting. So things like what we're doing today, an interview which will be disseminated, is important, and we continue and are open to every effort to produce this. Because in the end, it's a complicated matter, and implementation is also important. Different countries are taking different approaches. Of course, this happens at a very local scale. In each specific work site, every demolition site has to have its plan. You need to identify the materials, and then somebody must take care of separating them when they are demolished and treating them properly. And probably the first step to that is being aware that these substances are around and where they are. And that, it is something where I think all of us still need to do some more work, particularly in the implementation.
Yeah. We think this is important because we take care about workers in demolition. Do you think it's any European Commission plan?
Well, I mean, we have a whole set of
health and safety.
I mean, we have a whole acquis of European legislation on worker protection. So, of course, as you're aware, we have the Chemical Agents Directive, we have the Mutagens and Carcinogens Directive. So there's a whole set of legislation dealing with worker safety, which applies regardless of all the other elements that we have been discussing now, like the POPs regulation. So, in terms of worker protection, of course, knowing what you are dealing with is the first step. So there are many links with doing a proper assessment of a work post and knowing what a worker can be potentially exposed to the first thing you need to know is what that worker is going to be dealing with. So again, in any pre-demolition audit, being able, in the same way as one does with asbestos, where asbestos-containing materials are identified, being able to understand whether certain POPs are in insulation material, or in the sheathing of cables, or in certain insulation, or I don't know, in different elements, or in wood. So how likely it is that certain elements will be there are relevant in taking the necessary preventive measures in terms of worker protection, and also later to design the sound environmental management of that waste and where it will be sent to. So of course, knowing where things are is very important. And there, of course, it is not that easy to do. We are aware. And that's where I think also efforts from your sector are relevant in the sense you can only find out about where substances are in two ways. Either you know it beforehand, and there we go into knowledge about what things are placed on buildings, and we go into all of these concepts linked to construction material logbooks. On a broader scale, the Commission has been working and has already in place many efforts in terms of traceability of materials in products, and you may be aware of the database which is currently handled by ECHA and which comes from the last amendment of the Waste Framework Directive in 2018, where there is a requirement to notify substances of very high concern as defined in REACH. When they are present in products about a certain concentration limit, then those have to be notified not only down the supply chain, as was already an obligation under REACH, but also to be centrally notified to a database which is run by ECHA, which is the so-called SCIP database. That will contain some materials which are already construction materials, but is limited to SVHCs. Not all POPs are on that list, some are. But there are different approaches on traceability, and much more work will continue on that, I would say, in the coming year and years, for example, linked to the review of the eco-design directive. So in line with what is now called the Sustainable Products Initiative, and that is still work underway. So one thing in which we can improve is certainly in knowing more of what things go into materials and following all their life. Because then you can also start thinking about how you manage that waste. And in the case of a building, you can identify where this is. But of course, that doesn't solve the problem of buildings done 40, 50, 20 years ago where none of this existed. So for that, you need an expert eye. So you need to know what materials can potentially contain certain substances, and that requires the expertise in your sector. And of course, the presence of these substances can also be confirmed analytically. Of course, that has a cost. There are approaches for measuring devices that can screen on site certain things. For example, for some elements, you can screen them using, for example, handheld X-ray fluorescence devices, for example. There are kits, there are a number of things. Of course, that requires understanding there's a problem, and then having the means to apply it. So it is an additional effort, which of course is required of the sector. But again, there are many gains in terms of the proper environmental management and being able to ensure that a greater fraction of the material that comes from demolition can be used again for a productive purpose.
We think that the first main of this end up of this waste is landfill. Do you think about a European Community change this in the new legislation?
Well, I mean, of course, when we are talking about waste management, both for demolition waste and for any other waste stream, we have the general principles on the waste hierarchy, which are defined in the Waste Framework Directive. And certainly landfill is at the very end of that hierarchy. So certainly all our efforts are centered on the other end of the hierarchy, which is waste prevention, preparation for reuse and recycling. So in our view, sending demolition waste to landfills is the last option when really no other possibility is available. And of course, the situation is different in different European countries, and we are certainly willing to find all possible ways to promote the reduction of demolition waste going to landfill. I mean, there are many opportunities in terms of recovering the mineral fraction from demolition waste. There are many valuable fractions, including metals, which have to be separately, I mean, the only way to deal with them in an efficient way is separately collecting them and then sending them into the right treatments. So that is something which all the member states have an obligation to apply under the Waste Framework Directive and certainly minimize the amounts that go to landfilling. And I think communication and implementation of these obligations are ever so important to achieve these objectives.
We use your European Demolition Institute guide about hazardous substances, and we need is very important to present all of people about this because it's very important about the problem of a lot of contaminants in demolition building.
No, indeed, this is, I think, a very good example of communication, and in this case, providing guidance to professionals about how to go about doing selective demolition and about informing which substances have to be addressed and where they can potentially be. So indeed, I would like to thank the European Demolition Institute for this effort and for their continuing professional awareness raising on the matter. We, of course, also try to do communication from the side of the Commission, and of course, not only that, but also keeping up the pace with what happens at the international level. As I was saying at the beginning of this interview, under the Stockholm Convention, new POP substances are identified periodically. And in fact, if everything goes as planned, next month of June, there will be the next conference of the parties of the Stockholm Convention. It will be COP10. And there, it is very likely that a substance which has already been identified by the POPs Review Committee, in this case, a perfluorinated compound or a family of perfluorinated compounds known as PFHXS, similar in a way to PFAS and to PFOS, will also be identified if everything goes as it seems. So that, of course, means that we will have to deal with this one, and other substances are also currently being assessed under the POP ROC. So therefore, this is a matter that evolves continuously, and new efforts are required to identify where these new POPs are and to ensure that they are dealt with. Of course, from the side of the Commission, as I say, we have the legal obligation and certainly the desire to keep up pace from the legal point of view and to ensure this is communicated. So right now, we're in the process of reviewing the POPs regulation, and more particularly the annexes of the regulation that deal with waste, to include a number of substances that had already been listed and to review the limit values, the Annex 4 limit values which apply to waste. A Commission proposal was presented last October, so in 2021, and that proposal is currently now being discussed with the co-legislator. And certainly, I hope within this year, we will have a finally adopted review of the regulation.
Thank you very much for your explain, your time.
No, thank you, Javier, for giving me time to spread the word about how important it is to understand, identify, and properly address POP substances in waste, and in this particular case, in demolition waste, where I think, all of these efforts are extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much.